Greetings, everyone, and welcome once again to my series of videos exploring the connections between nature and Torah. Today, we're going to look at the story of Joshua stopping the sun. Now, this is one of those stories that the atheists absolutely love to quote in order to debunk the Bible. And there's a guy named Thomas Westbrook who has a YouTube channel called Holy Kool-Aid, who I think presents the atheist stance on this pretty well in this little 30-second clip.
The story of the day the sun stood still. You heard me right. The day the sun stood still. In order for the sun to stop in the sky, the Earth would have to stop spinning. And that's kind of problematic. You see, at the equator, the Earth spins at over 1,000 miles per hour. If the Earth stopped spinning, everything and everyone would be launched eastward at 1,000 miles an hour, similar to a car slamming on its brakes when you're not wearing a seatbelt.
Now, that would be true if the Bible were intended to be a PhD thesis. However, the Bible is not a science book, and sometimes I feel we're fighting the old battle between the sciences and the humanities. The Bible certainly falls on the side of humanities. Much of it is literature. Some of it is history. Some of it is straightforward laws. But on the other hand, much of it is metaphor. Much of it is symbolism. So let's take a look at the book of Joshua and see exactly what this text might be. Now, at the beginning of chapter 10, you get a straight rundown of what was going on. Joshua had formed an alliance with the Gibeonites, and now the other Amorite kings are worried about this alliance, and they surround the city of Gibeon. The Gibeonites send to Joshua for help. Joshua marches all night, surprises them in the morning. There's a battle, and by the end of the day, the battle is over. There's a hailstorm that comes up, and that helps the Joshua win the battle, and they're gone. Then, and now I need to put my glasses on to read this to you. Then you have this. You have, on that occasion, when the Lord routed the Amorites before the Israelites, Joshua addressed the Lord and said in the presence of the Israelites. And then in this Jewish Publication Society translation that I'm reading from, it switches from prose mode in terms of the typesetting to poetry mode and says, "Stand still, O sun at Gibeon, O moon in the valley of Ayalon." And the sun stood still and the moon halted while a nation wreaked judgment on its foes. And then says, as is written in the book of Jasher. What the heck is the book of Jasher? Well, first of all, in Hebrew, it's not Jasher. There's no J sound in Hebrew. It would be Yashar. It's one of these cases where the Hebrew Yud, the Y sound, got rendered as a J in German because a J is pronounced Y in German, and then it came back into English as a J. But Yashar means upright. So it's the book of the upright. And the footnote in this particular Jewish translation says that it's probably a book of war songs, a collection of ballads. Now, if that's what the book of Yashar was, if it was a collection of war ballads, then we have the possibility that they're using hyperbole. They're using exaggeration, not to lie, but that's the way these songs are. I spent part of an afternoon listening to some modern war songs, and I doubt that, as in the Battle of New Orleans song, that the British could outrun a pack of hounds. I don't know if the shells aboard the Bismarck ship were as big as trees, and I'm pretty sure that Davy Crockett never killed a bear at the age of 3. But when you sing hero songs, you sometimes exaggerate their qualities because these are meant to be patriotic. They're meant to be uplifting. They're meant to be inspiring. And so I'm going to run with it and say that the book of Yashar, from which this thing about the sun standing still is quoted, was a piece of poetry. Another thing we have to take into consideration is that we use language, especially with astronomy, that describes things in ways that we know are not literally true. We talk about sunrise and sunset, even though we know that it's really earth turn. But I'd like you to imagine how this particular iconic song from Fiddler on the Roof would have sounded if they sang Earth Turn, Earth Turn.
Sunrise,
I doubt very many people would be playing that at their wedding if the lyrics went, Earth turn, swiftly spins the globe. Because we use the terms sunrise and sunset, even though they are scientifically outdated, because that's the way people talk. And in Judaism, this is axiomatic. We say the Torah speaks in the language of human beings. It's not that God is too stupid to know how the solar system works. It's that we as human beings use terms like sunrise and sunset, and we understand what they mean. Now, I ask myself, is there any expression in English that would mean sun stands still the way that the King James Version rendered this? We'll get into the Hebrew later on, but right now we'll go with the English. Is there any kind of expression, sun stands still? And it turns out, yes, there is. The word solstice ultimately derives from the Latin solstitium, which comes from the part sol, sun, and sistere, to stand. This means that solstitium literally translates to something like the standing still of the sun. Now, when we say that the sun stands still on the summer solstice or the winter solstice, we don't mean that it stays up there at the zenith all day long. Rather, we mean it stops moving on the horizon for a day or two before it starts its journey back. This chart explains how this works. If you're facing south, the sun rises in the east and it sets in the west, but it rises a little further southeast in the winter and a little further northeast in the summer, and it's higher in the sky on the summer solstice and lower in the sky on the winter solstice. This photograph was taken on June 7th, facing due east, standing at the top of the hill on the way to my chicken coop. Now you can see that the sun is rising pretty far to the northeast. In this next picture, taken on June 16th, the sun is rising even farther northeast. And on June 19th, which is only 2 days before the summer solstice, you can see it's rising all the way to the northeast behind those trees. It'll stay there and not appear to move much for a couple of days until finally it'll begin to start its journey southward again, heading toward the winter solstice, which, when you get to the winter here, the sun is way over on the southeast. As you can see in this picture, it's a completely different landscape. So that was the explanation I was given many years ago, back in high school, when I asked the question, how could the sun stop? The possibility that it took place on the summer solstice, an extra long day where it did not stay up at the zenith, but it stayed shining much longer than usual and gave them enough time to win the battle. However, in 2017, you'll remember there was a total eclipse of the sun in the United States then, and everybody was thinking eclipse, eclipse, eclipse. And a couple of Israeli scientists decided to take a look at the language and wondered if the word dom, which is translated stand still by the King James and later on picked up by all these other translations, whether that really meant that the sun stopped moving in the sky, or did it mean the sun stopped shining in the sky? And they noticed the moon was also mentioned. And when you have an eclipse, you have the moon moves in front of the sun and the sun goes dark. Now, in a total eclipse, it looks like this. However, when they used the NASA data to calculate when there might have been an eclipse at the time of Joshua, which would be in the middle of the 13th century BCE sometime, they found an annular eclipse, which is when the moon doesn't quite completely block out the sun and you get a ring of fire. this is because the moon's orbit is slightly elliptical, so sometimes it's a little closer to the Earth, that's when you get a supermoon, and sometimes it's a little farther away. And when it's a little farther away and you have an eclipse, it doesn't completely block out the sun. And so they looked at this possibility, and they published this originally in Hebrew. I believe it was Ben Gurion University, but it was later picked up and verified by scientists at Cambridge. And then the story hit the news all over the place. There were headlines about how Joshua made the sun stand still with an eclipse. Now, this could help explain the paragraph that follows that poetic quote, which says, "Then the sun halted in mid-heaven and did not press on to set for a whole day. For the Lord fought for Israel, neither before nor since has there ever been such a day when the Lord acted on the words spoken by a man." Okay, now your atheist people are going to say, first of all, how could it have gone for a whole day? An eclipse doesn't last that long. And second of all, what's so unique about it? How can you say there never was a day like this? There's probably been thousands and thousands of eclipses. Well, first of all, the unique thing wasn't really the eclipse. The unique thing was that they won the battle. The miracle was in the timing. And here's how I see it playing out. They're fighting this battle. It begins to get dark. Joshua prays, "Oh my gosh, give me some more time. I just need some more time." And miracle of miracles, it gets light again and remains light until sundown. And so that would be the whole day. The time between the end of the eclipse and sundown was like an extra day to them. Remember, they may not have understood exactly what an eclipse was or why that was happening. But they have, all of a sudden, it starts to get dark and then it gets light again. And to me, that works perfectly. And one more little detail that might work here too. That word dom, which is written dalet mem in Hebrew, and in biblical Hebrew, there's no indication of the vowels. There is a system of putting little dots and dashes that's called nikud, but the thing is that didn't exist in the original text. As long as people spoke the language, they could read it without that. As a matter of fact, modern Israelis usually write Hebrew without the vowel signs. Now, dalet mem is dom, but it can also be read as dam. And dam means blood. It's the exact same word when Moses turns the Nile to blood. Now, an annular eclipse, if it's lower in the sky or if there's clouds, and remember the hailstorm that we mentioned earlier. There is a hailstorm mentioned in Joshua 10. If you have something to filter the light like that, it can turn the sky blood red. So there is the possibility that the sun turned red rather than stopping. All in all, I think that this eclipse, which, by the way, they say took place on October 30th, which is my birthday, so I really remember that. It was many thousands of years before, but October 30th, 1207 BCE, before the Common Era. But anyway, that this probably was what happened at the battle. Now, some people are going to say that I just ruined the whole thing, that it was supposed to be a miracle, and now I'm explaining it away with science. No, that's not the way I view this. If you can find something in archaeology or astronomy or some other science that verifies something in an ancient document like the Bible, even if the Bible is more poetic and it didn't happen exactly 100% literally, physically the way the Bible describes it, nevertheless, the fact that we can actually verify that there was an eclipse in 1207 BCE, which is the right period of time for there to have been the Battle of Gibeon, according to the biblical chronology, why, that's amazing to me. It says there really was a man named Joshua who really did fight a battle against the Amorite kings around the city of Gibeon. And the fact that there was an eclipse and that the sun, quote, stood still in a way that probably panicked the Amorites. They worshiped the sun, and it does say earlier in the text that they ran away, that the sun stopped shining and then came back out and shined for another whole day, as they perceived it in that time, was so amazing that they recorded it. And now, with modern computer technology, we can go back and calculate exactly when that eclipse was. But to me, this is an amazing thing, and it verifies something very important in Jewish history. Thank you for listening, and if you enjoyed this video, please click like and consider subscribing to my channel. Shalom Aleichem, peace be with you.